Hey folks, welcome back to Let's Play Nioh 2 on the Mysterious JG. And I was just recording a little Juan Yuan Sword 7, although the word sword may or may not be part of the name. And just thinking, yeah, sort of saying out loud, this game and that game are kind of winding up at the same time. Excuse me. And there's kind of some similarity, like, that game is generally a lot easier than this one, although it occasionally throws in a boss fight that gets me fits. Never the same way that boss fights in this game can. But, yeah, as we close in on the end of this one, I've enjoyed it. It hasn't been one that a lot of people have been watching, but I've enjoyed playing the game. Um, really, though, pretty relieved that it's almost over. Uh, this DLC in particular really just broke me. That mid boss of the first level is this DLC only has two story levels. The mid boss, who is the boss of the main story, come back, but he's got like a different pattern. I mean, he's not exactly the same enemy, but it's the same plot character. That one just broke me. I just didn't feel like getting good and beating it. I felt like just not just being done. And it's not a. I don't usually let games do that to me. It would happen sometimes in the NES era with like NES difficult games, but no, this one I really was like, okay, I've committed this much time. I really just want to win, but oh, that one really wore away at me. Psychologically, my desire to play the game just really, really took a hit. And it's bearing on me that I know that same enemy, or a different form of that same enemy, he's going to be the main enemy at the end of this. He has to be. The story now is about how this spirit, and I'm not 100% sure, to be totally honest, if it's the same as the old man with the cane. I think it's the same thing. Because the old man with the cane and the Kafui nicotine hat, he took over one of so first of all, the way yokai manipulate ki differs from that of humans, but should one chip away at their capacity to store ki, yokai will find their reserves very quickly exhausted. Um, so the main story of this game is basically that we are some mute weirdo who is half demon, but we befriend a young up and coming guy by the name of Hideyoshi Hashiba, but he's actually just we're Hide and he's Yoshi. I don't know what the hell he's calling himself before that. But we meet him and he's collecting those crazy yellow Amrita stones, which are actually a power of demonic origin that collects the energy of battle or something. I don't even know what the hell Amrita is after all this time. Really, they're yellow crystals that like they grant people power, and they're powered by strife and spite, but people tend to turn into demons when they use them. Okay, so they're not good. But the whole plot of the original Nioh was about them and how an evil English fellow named Edward Kelly was manipulating the forces in Japan and giving this power to the forces of oh God, what is it? I'm getting the names mixed up. In the Samurai Warriors games, he's always portrayed in this weird kabuki-ish outfit with like spiky horns on the side of his long flowing hair. And his name starts with an M. I can't remember now who he is. He's not Masamune. He's Ishida. Mitsuhide. No, Mitsunari Ishida. Right. So the original plot of Nioh is that there's an evil guy named Edward Kelly who's like encouraging war. Like the war is basically over at that point, right? Because but it's happening. Well, I'm getting into this long speech now, but you either are still enjoying this LP or you're not. So I'll keep doing things the way I've been doing it. Let's break down the plot of Nioh. Nioh is based on the tale of a historical figure. He's the same guy who is in it's an American novelist, I think. Maybe he's European. He's a Western novelist. He wrote a novel called Shogun, which is about this English mariner who is washed up on the shore of Japan. And in the novel, there's a whole lot more about what was going on between Catholics and Protestants that the Nioh doesn't really care about. Right? Nioh is looking at what was happening in Japan. So Shogun's an interesting novel. I'm reading it on my Kindle. I'm like maybe a quarter of the way through, but it has a lot of time spent talking about like the Jesuits hate the Franciscans, all the Catholics hate all the Protestants. The Portuguese have basically been subjugated under the Spaniards, but actually hate them. A lot of what's happening with the tensions in Europe are in the novel, and the novel is much less detailed about what's going on. Like, it uses fictionalized character names for real Japanese figures, like Tokugawa and uh, Mitsunari. Which is like, I haven't quite figured out, is that because the author didn't know the history that well and just knew the basics of it, or is it reflecting the fact that the story, it's one of these, the narrative takes the form not of omnipotent third person narration, but it switches between different characters' first person narratives. But most of the time we're in the head of the main, the English guy. Like, he has other people who washed up on shore with him. We never dwell with them. It occasionally jumps around and has different Japanese characters that we're seeing their perspective, but it's mostly following the story of the English guy who is represented in like the historical figure. I don't remember his name. He's called Anjin in the novel, and I think in history and in Nioh. Anjin is like shipwright or something like that. And that's what the Japanese call him. But the guy who in Nioh is the guy that I made talk like this. Like, he has like a normal Irish kind of accent. He's not in the novel. He's not Irish. He's English. I don't know, but the historical figure I think was English. But either way, yeah, it's the story of that guy coming to Japan and just being lost in this very foreign. Like, you might as well land on an alien planet, like a Western European landing in the middle of Japan and not knowing what he was getting into, right? It's one of the great fish out of water stories of all time. But in the Nioh version of things, like the novel Shogun so far has been about this guy he's trying to save his own life, because he's not some powerful samurai warrior who goes around fighting demons. He's a guy who is, he's captured, and he's basically a guest slash prisoner, and he's trying to navigate Japanese politics and find a way to be useful to his hosts, to protect himself and his men without being just completely, like, he doesn't want to get killed because he stops being useful. He's trying to find a way to counteract the Portuguese, because the Catholic Church has gotten a hold in Japan. It's interesting, and I don't actually know how the story is going to go because I'm only partway through reading it. But in the Nioh version of things, he's here because he had a guardian spirit named Saoirse who was stolen from him by the evil Edward Kelly, who was also lining him up to get killed in the Tower of London. So he's tracking down Edward Kelly to get back his guardian spirit, Saoirse. But over the course of this, he gets caught up in all these various things that are happening, and he eventually becomes an ally to the forces of Tokugawa, because Tokugawa at this point really has won the day and should basically become shogun and establish peace. But Mitsunari Ishida and his allies are kind of like the last holdouts, and the war just won't end because they're using Amrita power to kind of demonify their armies, and they won't let it end. So Anjin-sama fights his way through, and he's the hero of a hack and slash game, so he's present at every battle and is always the one who has to do the heavy lifting. He eventually wins the day, falls in love with a character who never shows up in the DLCs because I think they stopped paying the voice actress. But he falls in love with Kunoichi, who is the daughter of Tokugawa but hates Tokugawa. The real Anjin did eventually, I don't know what happens in the Shogun novel, he eventually is going to get to start his own family in Japan. The historical figure eventually came to realize he would never be allowed to leave Japan, so he started a new family in Japan. And like, there's actually some evidence that generations later there was communication between his European descendants and his Japanese descendants. Blah blah blah. I'm into this big long speech now. But where is all this going? Well, eventually we get into DLCs where we just explore other places of interest, and we have a DLC that's about the Date clan, and we introduce a new villain. Oh, because the evil Edward Kelly is eventually killed, but it turns out Edward Kelly is just a clone, and there's an even eviler guy back in England who's generating clones to go out and get him Amrita to help the England take over the world. And Anjin-sama, aka oh man, what is his actual name? William Adama. He yeah, he puts a stop to this because in the Nioh universe he's Irish and probably isn't crazy about the British. But more importantly, he recognizes that this guy's super evil and that Amrita crystals is leading to chaos everywhere. And but it does bring in the fact that England is at war with Spain at the very, very end. And then the DLCs bring it back because now we have a new villain named Maria, who is a Spanish woman who is manipulating Amrita for similar reasons. She's trying to bring it back to Spain to help Catholic Spain conquer Protestant England in Europe. And she's helping the Date, but eventually Anjin beats up enough people and has enough boss fights that the Date decide that Anjin is right and that she is evil. And then there's 2 DLCs worth of content that involve Anjin being involved in the final Osaka campaign, which ended the Sengoku Jidai, where the last great hero to oppose Tokugawa's rule, who is Yukimura Sanada. He starts out as your enemy, but he becomes your friend because eventually he realizes evil and badness and shit. And then Cha-Cha, who is a heroine we're supposed to like in the Samurai Warriors games, she turns out to be an evil demon lady who's been possessed by darkness powers and shit. And Maria kind of disappears from the story. Okay. Flashback to Nioh 2 is now a prequel where you are a mute. You could be male or female, but you're basically a mute, half demon, half human person who meets Hideyoshi before he gets famous. You guys team up. You become friends. You run some missions working for Dosan Saito, who's Nohime's father. But eventually he gets killed. You find out he gets killed by his own son. His son is your brother because eventually you find out that Dosan Saito is your dad and your mom is some demon woman. And you kill your brother who looks exactly like you, and all sorts of cool shit's going down. But although that's personally should be the important stuff for the protagonist never does anything, so it's really hard to care about his personal shit. So world politics takes over as the driver for our interest, and that's really the story of Hideyoshi, Hashiba/Toyotomi. And even though he's calling you Hide and you're Yoshi because Nobunaga, whom you both serve, gives you that name, and collectively you're like see, I don't know the popular culture and the non-nerd stuff. Like, is it like Benifer? Isn't that like Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck or something? Like, whatever. You get like a couple name of Hideyoshi. But eventually Hideyoshi, there's weird stuff going on where Mitsuhide Akechi, who we never really, you don't meet him that much, although he's revealed to be, he survived the incident where he was supposed to have died, and in the Nioh world he survives and becomes a monk and is secretly helping Anjin during the events of Nioh. But in Nioh 2 he's hanging around, he's still a lord, and he has a guy who works for him who's got some kind of weird glowing red eyes and occasionally does weird demon shit. And Hide Matsunaga's hanging around in spider armor, but he never really enters into the story, unfortunately. Which is a shame. I really wanted more of him while he was alive to be a character, because he's integrated in a fun way as the tea house master, but he's a ghost for the whole story, or almost all of it. But anyway, yeah. So in Nioh 2, some guy whose name I don't remember, who is a servant of Mitsuhide, but because he doesn't have a playable Samurai Warriors character, I don't know who he is, because that's unfortunately. I'm not saying it's right, but that drives whether or not I know who a historical figure is, whether or not they'd appeared in other Koei games. He's possessed by demons, and you kill him and defeat him, and it looks like everything's okay, but the demons that infested him instead take over Hideyoshi. Or Yoshi, I guess. And he starts getting more and more evil, and they use a different name for him, which I forget, but is also Tokichiro, I guess. Because the historical figure of Hideyoshi Hizahide is an interesting one. He comes from a common background, but he's incredibly talented and capable. Nobunaga, who comes from a noble house, recognizes his talents and utilizes him and promotes him, which angers some of his compatriots who are also from noble houses, but are subservient to Nobunaga's house, the Oda, I should say. They don't really like Hideyoshi. They think he's an upstart. But Hideyoshi basically is this rags to riches story, but once he comes to power, he changes the law and makes it impossible for anyone to follow his path. He makes himself a noble, but then he really locks shit down so that other commoners of talent cannot become nobles the way he did. So, is he like the ultimate self-centered opportunist who doesn't want anyone else to ever be a rival to him, or did he have like weird delusions that he always should have been noble all along? Like, it's hard to say. But he's kind of an interesting character in that he's really smart. He's kind of a jerk. It was probably important for someone like him to be around to organize things and end the war, but he takes on a whole different component if you go beyond what's portrayed in the Samurai Warriors games, and you find out about the fact that he basically invaded Korea, which the Samurai Warriors games completely ignore. He launched a massive invasion of Korea because he thought it was important to keep the samurai houses occupied. And also, like most Japanese nobility, he had these really racist views as the Koreans, the Chinese, and all other non-Japanese Asians as being kind of inferior beings. So, like, he thought, oh yeah, we'll go take over Korea. It'll be easy win, and it'll keep the army sharp and focused. And it was not a good idea in the end. Anyway, all that's ignored in Nioh as well. Like, Nioh 2 doesn't talk about you're never going to play a Japanese game based on Japanese history that really goes a lot into the fact that they launched a completely unnecessary, just grossly aggressive invasion of Korea, basically to keep the soldiery occupied. That's not a thing that Japanese video games are going to get into. But it happened. And but in Nioh 2 world, Tokichiro starts acting evil because the actual historical figure of Hideyoshi started getting pretty dark once he had power. And in this game, it's because he was infected by demon power, and he gets really obsessed with collecting Amrita. He starts doing really bad stuff. There's some Tea Master guy who said bad stuff, and he kills him. It reminds me, Okuni is involved at one point, blah, blah. But basically, the story becomes about you trying to put a stop to your old running buddy because he's clearly fucking evil. And I think you understand at this point, although it's hard to tell what the protagonist actually knows at any given time because he never fucking talks. But there are a few characters like, the lady from the demon hunting tribe, Mumio, and other people are wandering around having dialogue, which suggests we may ultimately know that there's an evil spirit that's been hopping around infesting people, and he's in Tokichiro now. And you corner Tokichiro at one point, and Tokichiro stabs you to death. And this is, I think, when you really lock down the fact that, yeah, he's possessed by a demon. He just freaking murdered us. So you wake up in the afterlife, and that's when Anjin enters the story, because Adama from Nioh 1 is suddenly around, and he says stuff like, all right, well, if you guys help me get rid of Maria, which really should... Oh, by the way, we jump forward way far in time now. We skip a couple of decades, I think. So now we're like Nioh 1 time, because Anjin's around, and he's got a kid. Even though none of this makes sense now that I think about it, because Anjin... Yeah, none of this makes sense. Anjin wasn't even... Like, Hideyoshi was dead at the beginning of the events of the original Nioh, I thought. Anyway, I hadn't even thought about that before. None of it makes sense. But anyway, at the end, you're running around. You now have allies. The whole story is that an evil spirit has been possessing everybody, and it looks like an old man with a cane. He provides a fairly nasty boss fight, but eventually the final boss is... He possesses you, and inside your head, you are fighting Okahamazu, or whatever the heck. He's this young, like, instead of being an old man with a cane, he's like a youthful but big and strong, powerful-looking yokai. He's fighting in your head, but now Hideyoshi, who's been free of the malign influence, finally... Oh, that's right. Hideyoshi's dead, too. Okay, so the reason we're able to actually fight is... Hideyoshi's dead. So Hideyoshi's brought back to life, I think, just for the purposes of getting the demon out of him. And then once we do, either he disappears and becomes a monk, or he just dies again. But like the good part of his soul is still around and helps you to defeat the bad demon. And also Maria just gets... Maria, who had been this slippery evil character for the original Nioh, just shows up for one scene. It's like, haha, I'm Maria. And then like Adama just puts a hand on her shoulder, not so fast. And it was very silly. But the point of the last 15 minutes of chatter is There's some evil dude who was jumping around possessing people, and we fight him at the end of the original Nioh 2 non-DLC stuff, to drive him out of our mind. But by us being possessed by him, but actually managing to defeat him in a battle taking place in our own head, we think he's sealed up forever. Or we force him into like a stone, which we stab with a special glowing power knife, or something happens where we think it's over. But then it turns out maybe it isn't. Hence the DLCs. Here's the problem with the DLC. The first DLC is you go back in time and you're helping like Minamoto, no, whatever his name is. Like you're fighting, you're helping the Minamotos fight the Tyra, but it never really connects to anything else other than the fact that there's Amrita and people turn into demons and shit. But you get sent back in time with the cat spirit and the goat spirit, who are narrators, and you do some fighting there. And then we have another DLC where you've got the guy who teaches Yamio magic in this game, who I think at the end we're supposed to realize that he made a clone of himself through magic to stay in his own time, and he traveled to the future to help us later. Or he made a clone of himself and sent it to the future. Either way, he's met us and helped us in the main story, but acts like we don't know him here. He's running around with some lady who is the actual historical person she was based on was a guy, and she's fighting some evil guys in the capital. But again, it's its own little story, but it doesn't connect to anything. Finally, this third DLC, we get sent to a place where the evil monster who'd been plaguing us throughout is throughout the original Nioh 2 main story. I don't know if it's the same figure or not. There's the old man in the hat with a staff who shows up and grins malevolently, and we think he might have killed our mom. He's definitely been hopping around from person to person, possessing them, making them evil. And we defeat him, but he's still not gone. At the like it's implied he's still not gone. And then at the end, we fight the youthful demon, who I'm not sure if they're the same character or not. But now we're fighting this youthful demon who does not recognize us, because we seem to have traveled back in time to wherever he originally came from. And he's this big, powerful demon who hates humans and is trying to raise an army of yokai to fight humans. And our mom is around, except that our mom is like older in these scenes where we see her later. And she's youthful now, and I don't think she knows that we're her son from the future. But she's the sister of the evil Okahara. And she's like, yokai and humans can live together. We can have peace, but we have to stop my brother first because he's really strong and he really doesn't want that to happen. So that's kind of where we are. We're fighting through the ultimate castle of evil where ultimate evil guy lives. And even though we travel to the past to fight him, and we already know in the future he's still around jumping around possessing people, maybe we can stop him now and make the events of Nioh 2 have never actually happened and thus create a massive temporal paradox. But only if he's like the same guy as the old man, because otherwise he's not. But if he is, I don't know why he was in our head at the end of Nioh 2. I don't know. What I do know is that I looked at like the Nioh 2 wiki, and while there's probably going to be a side mission or two that open up after this is done. I know, for example, like the boss at the end of the prior story mission, which is this woman who, because the mid-boss of that level was Okahara, and he was a pain in the ass, and then it was another pain in the ass to fight his girlfriend, who was also a demon. I think she appears in more than one mission, so she either pops up again in this mission at some point, or she pops up in like as the boss of as a non-required side mission of this DLC. But the main boss of this DLC, the person we're going through to fight, is Okahara, and he is the guy who, if we defeat him once and for all, the Nioh 2 is kind of out of things to do, because it's already had DLC where we just go to different sections of time that have nothing to do with anything. So we're closing in on the end of a story which had some interesting concepts, but overall never really made any sense. Alright guys, I didn't set out to do this, but I've realized now I've pretty much, like, you know what, when I was more than 10 minutes in, I was like, fuck it. Let's just make this a video where I explain the story. But it's not what I set out to do. But now I'm like, okay, I'm now close enough to the end of a video to just call it a video. So this video, I'll call it something like Nioh 2 story recap, no action, something like that. So that both of you who are watching this series can skip it if you want. So instead of getting the normal 4 views, this might get only 2 views. But one of my favorite episodes, going back and look, like I did a recap at the end, like near the end of Final Fantasy. Actually, no, not really. Final Fantasy 13-2 is a weird series because there was enough post main story content. That game was meant to be played more than once, so it had post story stuff, which made quite a few videos worth of content. But like right before I won the main story for the first time, I just did a video just talking about the story, and it was fun. And I hope this was fun too. But when we come back next time, we're gonna have to play the game. See you then.